An old photograph slipped out of his wallet at the diner. What the waitress saw changed the way the entire town looked at him forever. The bell above the door jingled as Franklin Miller stepped into Daisy's diner that Saturday morning. Same routine as always, same corner booth, same black coffee, no sugar. To the locals, he was just Old Frank, quiet, polite, never caused a fuss. He tipped well, read the newspaper, and slipped out without many words. Nobody knew much about him, and nobody asked. But that morning, something changed. As Frank pulled a few crumpled bills from his wallet to pay, a small photograph slipped out and fluttered to the linoleum floor. The waitress bent down to pick it up. At first, she thought it was just some faded family picture. But when her eyes focused, her hand froze. The photo showed a much younger Frank, strong, sharp-eyed, wearing a Navy uniform. And he wasn't alone. Beside him stood a row of men, all in combat gear. At the center was a decorated general whose face every American history book carried. The waitress looked up, stunned. "Mr. Miller, is this you?" Frank's eyes flicked to the photo. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, with a steady hand, he took it back, slipped it inside his wallet, and murmured, "Must have dropped it." And that was it. No explanation, no story, just silence. But by then, others in the diner had noticed. The waitress couldn't shake the image. That wasn't just any old service photo. She recognized the general standing beside Frank, General Robert Keaton, the man whose strategies ended a brutal conflict overseas. His face had been in documentaries, his speeches carved into textbooks. And there was Frank, standing right next to him, not in the crowd, not at the edge, beside him. By the time Frank had left the diner, the whispers had already started. A man at the counter leaned toward his buddy. "Did you see that?" He was there. With Keaton, another customer chimed in. "My uncle served in that unit, said only the toughest even made it out." The story spread beyond the diner walls. By afternoon, half the town had heard a version of it. The quiet man at Daisy's was more than he seemed. Some doubted, others grew curious. A few even dug out old history books comparing the faded photo to grainy images of SEAL teams decades ago. And sure enough, the resemblance was undeniable. That night, Frank's porch light burned late. He sat in his old rocking chair, staring into the dark, the photograph laid across his palm. His thumb brushed the edge, tracing the faces of men long gone. The silence he had carried for decades was beginning to break. Not by his choice, but by a single photo that refused to stay hidden. The next morning, Frank returned to Daisy's diner like he always did. Same corner booth, same black coffee, no sugar. But the atmosphere was different. Conversations quieted when he walked in. Eyes followed him, some curious, some doubtful. A man from the VFW hall finally stood up. His name was Carl, a Gulf War vet with a booming voice. "Frank," he called across the diner, "that photo yesterday. Was it really you? With General Keaton?" The room went still. Forks clinked against plates. Frank didn't flinch. He stirred his coffee once, then set the spoon down. His voice was calm, almost tired. "I served," he said simply. "Long time ago." Carl frowned. "That's not just serving. That's history. Why didn't you ever say anything?" Frank's gaze drifted to the window. Outside, kids ran past on their way to school, laughing, alive. He let the silence linger before answering. "Because the men who didn't come home, they're the ones worth remembering. Not me." For a long moment, no one spoke. Even Daisy behind the counter lowered her eyes. The weight of his words hung heavier than any metal, but not everyone understood. A younger man at a nearby table muttered just loud enough for others to hear. "Sounds like a tall tale to me." Old guys always exaggerate. Frank's eyes met his for the first time all morning. Not angry, not defensive, just steady. The kind of stare that silences doubts without a word. And in that silence, respect began to grow, slow but undeniable. 3 days later, the diner's morning rush was winding down. Frank sat in his usual booth, sipping coffee, when the bell above the door chimed. The room froze, because the man who walked in wasn't a stranger. It was General Keaton, not in uniform this time, but his presence filled the space all the same. Broad-shouldered, gray-haired, and carrying himself with the calm authority of someone who had led men through fire. He scanned the room once, then his eyes locked on Frank. The diner went silent as the general walked across the floor. No one moved, no one breathed. He stopped at Frank's table, and then, without hesitation, he stood at attention and saluted. Forks clattered, someone gasped, even Daisy's hand trembled as she set down a mug. "Major Briggs," the general said, his voice steady but reverent, "I never thought I'd see you again." "Sir, it was your leadership that saved me and my men outside Da Nang. Half of us wouldn't be alive today if not for you." The silence deepened. Frank didn't move for a long moment. Finally, he set his coffee cup down, pushed himself to his feet, and returned the salute with a slow, deliberate motion. "Sit down, General," Frank said softly. "You don't owe me that." But Keaton shook his head. "With respect, sir, I do." The room erupted in whispers, but no one laughed now. No one doubted. In that instant, the quiet old man in the corner wasn't invisible anymore. He was living history, standing right in front of them. Word spread faster than wildfire. By the afternoon, everyone in town had heard what happened inside Daisy's diner. "Did you hear?" The general saluted him. "They say he saved men in Vietnam, led them through ambushes." "My grandfather knew his name, Briggs. Said he was a ghost story in the military, a legend nobody talked about." The laughter that had once followed Frank was gone. In its place came hushed respect. That evening, when Frank stepped outside his small, weathered home on the edge of town, he found something waiting on his porch. A folded American flag. A note that read, "Thank you." And beside it, a pair of old combat boots, polished, laces tied neatly. No name attached, just a quiet offering from someone who understood. The next morning, people began showing up at Daisy's, not to gawk, not to pry, but just to sit near him. Farmers, shopkeepers, even a few of the same teenagers who had once laughed. They didn't ask for stories. They didn't ask for proof. They just sat in silence, coffee in hand, like students waiting for a lesson that might never be spoken. Frank never gave speeches. He never raised his voice. But slowly, the town began to realize that sometimes the loudest lessons come from the men who've already given everything and have nothing left to prove. Weeks passed, and the town began to change in small but powerful ways. At the high school, the principal set aside a wall near the gymnasium. A brass plaque was bolted above a simple frame. It read, "For the ones who served in silence." Inside the frame, they placed a photo of Frank Briggs, not a staged portrait, not a uniformed shot, just a candid picture taken at Daisy's diner, his weathered hands around a coffee cup, his eyes steady, watching. At first, Frank resisted. "I don't need a wall," he muttered, but Daisy told him, "It's not for you, Frank. It's for them, so they remember one Saturday during the Veterans Association meeting. The diner was fuller than ever. Soldiers young and old gathered around, some in uniform, some in plain clothes, all with the same look in their eyes, respect. And then, without announcement, the general returned. He stepped quietly through the door. No fanfare, no entourage. He walked straight to Frank's booth, placed a challenge coin on the table, and said only 4 words. "You kept us alive." Frank didn't reply. He simply closed his hand over the coin, gave a slow nod, and went back to his coffee. Silence fell again. Not the silence of mockery this time, but the silence of reverence, the kind of silence that says, "We finally see you." Years later, the chair by the diner window sat empty. Frank Briggs had passed quietly in his sleep, no ceremony, no speeches, just the way he lived. The morning of his funeral, the town's civic hall overflowed, not with laughter this time, but with people who had once mocked him, now standing shoulder to shoulder with veterans who had served beside him. The general returned once more, older now, his uniform crisp. He didn't speak from the podium. He didn't need to. Instead, he walked to the front, faced Frank's flag-draped casket, and raised his hand in a long, steady salute. One by one, the townspeople followed. Some saluted, some pressed a hand over their heart, others simply bowed their heads. Even the teenagers who once laughed now stood silently, their eyes fixed on the man they finally understood. At the cemetery, the wind caught the flags that lined the path. As the rifles fired their 3 volleys, the echo carried across the fields like thunder rolling over memory. The folded flag was placed in Daisy's trembling hands. She clutched it to her chest, whispering, "Took them long enough to see you, Frank." That night, the brass plaque in the high school gleamed under the hallway light. Beneath it, someone had taped a note written in a young recruit's handwriting. "Because of you, I won't quit." And so, Frank Briggs was gone. But the silence he left behind wasn't emptiness. It was a reminder that true valor doesn't shout. It endures. It waits until the world is ready to listen. If this story touched your heart, remember, there are countless more waiting to be told. Don't miss the next one. Hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you'll always know when a new story arrives, because true heroes may walk silently, but here, their voices will always be heard.